Ever wondered how a reserved woman riddled with self-doubt and born into a world of privilege became the fearless titan who transformed the Washington Post into a beacon of truth that took on the mightiest powers in America? Meet Katharine Graham, a name synonymous with courage, grit, and groundbreaking journalism. In this gripping YouTube journey, we'll uncover the extraordinary life of a woman who defied every odd to redefine what leadership looks like, turning personal struggles into a legacy that still inspires millions. Picture a young girl growing up in the lap of luxury, surrounded by brilliant minds and dazzling wealth, yet wrestling with feelings of inadequacy in a family that seemed larger than life. From those quiet, introspective early years, she found her spark in the world of words, diving into journalism with a passion that would shape her destiny. Life threw curveballs, love, loss, and unexpected responsibility. But when the spotlight called, she stepped up, taking the helm of a struggling newspaper and forging it into a powerhouse that shook the foundations of power. This isn't just a story about running a paper. It's about a woman who faced down chaos, from internal battles that threatened to silence her press to bold stands against government giants, all while breaking barriers as a female pioneer in a man's world. Her journey earned her accolades, inspired Hollywood, and left an indelible mark on history. If you love tales of underdogs who rise, women who shatter ceilings, or the raw power of truth-telling, this video is your front row seat. Smash that like button, subscribe for more epic biographies, and drop a comment. What inspires you most about trailblazers like Katharine? Let's dive into her unforgettable saga. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Childhood and education, 1917 to 1938. On June 16, 1917, in the bustling heart of New York City, a baby girl named Katharine Meyer came into a world that was already spinning with global turmoil. World War I raging across the ocean, the United States freshly involved, and the streets alive with the energy of a changing era. This wasn't just any birth, it was into a family of extraordinary wealth, influence, and intellectual firepower, one that would shape her into a figure of quiet strength amid personal shadows. Katharine's story, from those first cries through her formative years up to 1938, is one of glittering privilege, tangled with emotional challenges, a distant yet powerhouse family, and an education that ignited her mind, setting the stage for her later triumphs in American media. Let's start with her family roots, because they were the foundation of everything. Her father, Eugene Meyer, was no ordinary man. Born into a lineage of financial wizards, he had carved out his own empire on Wall Street, turning smart investments into vast fortunes. By the time Katharine was a teenager, Eugene had risen to become the chairman of the Federal Reserve, holding that pivotal role from 1930 to 1933. Picture this. The Great Depression was just beginning to grip the nation, banks failing left and right, people losing everything, and there was her dad at the helm of the country's central banking system, making decisions that could steady or shake the economy. It was a high-stakes job that demanded sharp intellect and unyielding resolve, qualities that defined him. But his background went deeper. His paternal grandfather, Mark Eugene Meyer, was himself a prominent financier, handling big deals in banking circles. And even further back, her great-grandfather, Rabbi Joseph Newmark, blended spiritual leadership with business acumen. He wasn't content with just leading prayers. He built enterprises that supported his community, showing an entrepreneurial spirit that echoed through the generations. On the maternal side, things were just as captivating. Her mother, Agnes Ernst Meyer, born Agnes Ernst, was a force of nature, a bohemian intellectual with a fierce liberal streak. Even though she channeled her activism, through the Republican Party. She was deeply passionate about the arts, supporting creators and collecting works that spoke to her soul. But Agnes wasn't one to stay on the sidelines. She dove into political causes, advocating for education reforms, women's rights, and social justice in ways that were progressive for her time. What really set her apart was her incredible network of friends, people who weren't just acquaintances, but titans in their fields. She counted the renowned French sculptor Auguste Rodin among her close circle. He was the genius behind iconic works like The Thinker, and you can bet their conversations delved into the raw emotions captured in bronze and marble. Then there was Marie Curie, the trailblazing Polish-French scientist who won Nobel Prizes for her groundbreaking work on radioactivity. Imagine Agnes and Marie discussing the mysteries of radium over afternoon tea, sharing insights on perseverance in a male-dominated world. Thomas Mann, the German novelist whose writings critiqued society and later led to his exile from Nazi Germany, was another friend, perhaps exchanging ideas on literature's role in challenging tyranny. Albert Einstein, the physicist who revolutionized our understanding of the universe with his theory of relativity, added a layer of scientific wonder to their gatherings. Debates on space, time, and the human condition must have filled the air. Eleanor Roosevelt, the activist First Lady who pushed for civil rights and humanitarian efforts, brought political fire. John Dewey, the American philosopher and educator who transformed ideas about learning and democracy, influenced thoughts on progressive education. And Saul Alinsky, the community organizer whose methods would later inspire grassroots movements, rounded out this eclectic group with talks on empowering the marginalized. These weren't superficial connections. They were deep, meaningful friendships that brought a whirlwind of ideas into the Meyer household. The family itself was a blend of cultures and faiths. Eugene's heritage was Jewish from the Alsace region, a place with its own rich history of resilience amid European shifts, while Agnes came from a Lutheran family, her parents German immigrants who had crossed the Atlantic seeking new opportunities. This mix created a home that was cosmopolitan, open to diverse thoughts, but also one where traditions were fluid. Katharine and her 4 siblings were baptized in the Lutheran faith, following their mother's path, yet they attended services at an Episcopal church, reflecting a pragmatic approach to religion that prioritized community and ethics over strict dogma. Her siblings added their own colors to the family portrait. The eldest sister, Florence Meyer, grew into a talented photographer, capturing life's moments with an artist's eye, and she married the Austrian actor Oskar Homolka, injecting a dose of old Hollywood drama and theatrical flair into family gatherings. Then there was her brother, Eugene Meyer III, affectionately called Bill, who would later carry on some of the family's business interests with a steady hand. Sisters Ruth Meyer and Elizabeth Meyer, known as Biss, completed the quintet, Ruth with her own quiet pursuits and Biss as the youngest, bringing youthful energy. And let's not forget their aunt, Florence Meyer Blumenthal, Eugene's sister, who left a lasting legacy by founding the Prix Blumenthal, an award that honored outstanding achievements in literature, science, and the arts, often focusing on French talents and underscoring the family's transatlantic bonds. With all this wealth and prestige, the Meyers were undeniably loaded. Their fortune allowing for a lifestyle most could only dream of, came a childhood that was far from the warm, hands-on upbringing you might expect. The family owned multiple homes scattered across the country, symbols of their status and mobility. Their primary residences were a stately mansion in Washington, D.C., perfectly positioned near the corridors of power where political deals were struck and history unfolded, and a vast estate in Westchester County, New York, specifically in Mount Kisco, which offered sprawling gardens, rolling hills, and a retreat from urban chaos. This estate was no small property. It was a grand affair with room for lavish entertaining, and interestingly, it would later change hands and become part of Donald Trump's portfolio, adding a modern twist to its storied past. Summers were often spent there, away from the sweltering city heat, with the children playing in the expansive grounds while the world buzzed on. But for Katharine, these luxuries masked a profound sense of isolation. Her parents were perpetually on the go, Eugene buried in financial empires and government duties, Agnes jetting off for artistic pursuits, political rallies, or visits with her famous friends. Travel was constant. They might hop to Europe for cultural immersions or crisscross the U.S. for social engagements, leaving the children behind. As a result, Katharine saw little of them during her early years. Instead, she was nurtured by a rotating cast of nannies who handled daily care with efficient warmth, tutors who imparted lessons in subjects from arithmetic to etiquette, and governesses who oversaw routines with a structured hand. It was a classic case of material abundance paired with emotional scarcity. The silver spoons were plentiful, but the hugs and heart-to-hearts were rare. This setup fostered independence in Katharine from a young age. She learned to rely on herself, to find comfort in solitude, but it also sowed seeds of loneliness that would linger. Nowhere was this emotional gap more evident than in her relationship with her mother, Agnes. It was a bond fraught with tension, one that Katharine later dissected in her memoir, Personal History, with raw honesty. Agnes, so vibrant and outgoing, could be sharply critical, her words landing like barbs that dismissed Katharine's efforts or belittled her presence. Picture a young girl, eager for approval, only to face condescension that eroded her self-esteem bit by bit. Agnes's high expectations, fueled by her own achievements and social prowess, seemed to highlight Katharine's perceived shortcomings. Part of this strain may have stemmed from Katharine's appearance. She viewed herself as utterly ordinary, even ugly, by the standards of her glamorous family circle. In a world where beauty and poise opened doors, she felt mismatched. Plain features, awkward demeanor that amplified her self-doubt. Photos from the era confirm this self-perception. A girl with unremarkable looks in a sea of polished elegance, making her retreat further into shyness. Social settings became ordeals. She avoided crowds, dreaded public speaking, and preferred the shadows to the spotlight. Yet, this didn't crush her spirit entirely. Deep inside burned a resilient drive. She was incredibly diligent, throwing herself into tasks with focus and determination. Learning became her refuge. She devoured books, explored ideas, and discovered a profound love for writing. It wasn't just a hobby. She had a natural talent, a way with words that allowed her to articulate thoughts she couldn't voice aloud, crafting narratives that hinted at the powerhouse journalist and publisher she would become. Her education mirrored this journey from quiet curiosity to intellectual awakening, starting with innovative approaches that suited her introspective nature. As a small child, Katharine attended a Montessori school until the 4th grade. This was groundbreaking for 1920s America. Maria Montessori's method emphasized hands-on learning, independence, and following a child's natural interests rather than rigid drills. It was perfect for her. Classrooms filled with sensory materials encouraged exploration, building confidence through achievement rather than competition. By 4th grade, she transitioned to the Potomac School in Washington, D.C., a more traditional yet elite institution that added structure, refining her social skills and academic foundations amid peers from influential families. High school brought her to the Madeira School, an all-girls boarding school in McLean, Virginia, noted sometimes as Greenway in older references, where her father's generosity shone through. He donated a generous swath of land for the school's new campus, ensuring it had hundreds of acres for academics, equestrian activities, arts programs, and personal growth. At Madeira, Katharine's interest in journalism sparked. She worked on the school newspaper, honing her writing skills and tasting the thrill of storytelling. It was a holistic environment, blending rigorous studies with extracurriculars, like horseback riding, which offered outlets for her energy. College marked a pivotal shift. She began at Vassar College in 1934, a prestigious women's liberal arts school in Poughkeepsie, New York, known for fostering independent thinkers and subtly introducing feminist ideas. Vassar was a haven for bright young women with classes delving into literature, history, and social sciences. But after 2 years, Katharine sought something more dynamic. In 1936, she transferred to the University of Chicago, drawn to its urban vibrancy, coeducational setting, and reputation for intellectual rigor under President Robert Maynard Hutchins, who championed the Great Books curriculum. This move was transformative. Chicago's campus, amid the Windy City's roaring energy, exposed her to diverse perspectives. She dove into a circle of friends who thrived on debating politics and grand ideas, late-night discussions on Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies, aimed at pulling America from the Depression's depths, the horrors unfolding in the Spanish Civil War as a proxy for global ideologies, or Adolf Hitler's menacing rise in Germany. Katharine absorbed it all, developing a staunch opposition to fascism's spread, not just in Nazi Germany with its oppressive regime and anti-Semitic horrors, but also in Benito Mussolini's Italy, where dictatorship crushed freedoms. She saw the dangers clearly: totalitarianism's threat to democracy, human rights, and peace. Conversely, she grew deeply sympathetic to the American labor movement, cheering for workers' strikes that demanded fair wages, safer conditions, and union rights. Think of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, organizing auto workers in Detroit or steel workers in Pennsylvania. Katharine empathized with their struggles amid economic hardship, viewing labor rights as essential to social justice. These years weren't isolated from family influences. While at Chicago, her father mailed her copies of the Washington Post, which he had boldly purchased at a bankruptcy auction in 1933 for $825,000, a move that revived the struggling paper and embedded journalism in the family legacy. Reading those issues kept her connected to D.C.'s pulse, sharpening her awareness of current events. The global backdrop added layers. The 1930s were turbulent, with the Depression's unemployment lines, Hitler's annexation of Austria in 1938, and Mussolini's invasions in Africa. Katharine's liberal leanings crystallized here, influenced by her mother's progressive friends, like Dewey, whose educational philosophies echoed in her own path, or Alinsky, whose organizing tactics highlighted grassroots power. Culturally, her upbringing was a tapestry of blends. The Lutheran baptism and Episcopal attendance created a flexible faith, teaching moral values without rigidity. Siblings enriched this. Florence's photography preserved family moments. Her union with Homolka brought stage stories. Bill embodied business continuity. Ruth and Biss offered sibling camaraderie. Aunt Florence's pre-Blumenthal, awarding French innovators, reinforced cultural ties, perhaps inspiring Katharine's appreciation for excellence. Childhood glimpses of grandeur lingered, overhearing Einstein ponder physics at dinner or frolicking in Westchester Gardens during parental soirees. Yet parental absence stung. Eugene's finance marathons, Agnes's activism tours, left voids filled by staff bonds. Nannies instilled manners, tutors sparked curiosity, governesses enforced discipline. This bred early self-reliance, turning emotional hurdles into fuel for growth. Her self-doubt, rooted in maternal criticism and perceived plainness, persisted, making social tortures of events. But privately, she flourished, hours buried in books, solace in scripting thoughts, emerging talents in essays and journals foreshadowing her media mastery. Schools amplified this. Montessori's child-led ethos matched her inquisitiveness, letting her learn at her pace with blocks and puzzles. Potomac introduced elite networks, polishing poise. Madeira's boarding life, bolstered by Eugene's land gift, offered equestrian trails for reflection, arts for expression, and journalism via the school paper, where she edited pieces on school life. Vassar's women-centric world subtly nurtured feminism, classes on suffrage, literature by Woolf or Wharton, but Chicago's co-ed intensity challenged her. Diverse classmates, rigorous seminars on economics, philosophy. Debate groups tackled New Deal's welfare expansions. Spanish Republicans versus Franco's fascists. Hitler's Kristallnacht horrors in 1938. She rejected Axis aggression, supporting unions like the 1937 Flint sit-down strike, where GM workers won recognition. By 1938, graduating with a BA from Chicago, Katharine had transformed from a timid, self-conscious girl into a thoughtful, politically aware young woman. Though shyness lingered, her foundation was solid. Privilege tempered by pain, intellect over appearance, vulnerabilities forged into strengths. This era reminds us how early experiences sculpt us, preparing for unforeseen destinies. As she stepped into the world, briefly working at the San Francisco News covering a major wharf workers' strike, her first taste of real journalism, the seeds planted in those 2 decades were ready to bloom. Career beginnings and marriage, 1938 to 1963. In the summer of 1938, fresh from her graduation at the University of Chicago, Katharine Meyer dove headfirst into the demanding world of journalism, starting with a brief but intense stint at the San Francisco News. She earned a modest $24 a week there, a salary that barely covered basics in the bustling Bay Area, but it gave her invaluable hands-on experience. One of her key assignments was helping to cover a significant labor dispute involving wharf workers, a continuation of the tensions that had boiled over in the massive 1934 West Coast waterfront strike, but still very much alive in 1938 with ongoing lockouts, negotiations over wages, safer working conditions, and stronger union rights. The International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union was at the forefront, clashing with shipping employers in a standoff that disrupted ports from Seattle to San Diego. Katharine found herself amid the action along the foggy Embarcadero, where picket lines snaked along the docks, police patrolled uneasily to prevent violence, and the economic fallout halted shipments of vital goods like timber, agricultural products, and imported luxuries. She chased down stories, interviewed weathered longshoremen with stories of grueling labor and low pay, and wove together the human elements, the families depending on those jobs, the strikers' determination against corporate resistance, amid the constant backdrop of clanging ship bells, seagull cries, and the salty Pacific breeze. This wasn't glamorous work, it was gritty, fast-paced reporting that taught her to spot the heart of a story under pressure, sharpening her instincts for narrative and empathy that would serve her well later. Though her time in San Francisco lasted less than a year, It ignited her passion for journalism and exposed her to the raw power of labor movements in a nation still recovering from the Great Depression. By the end of 1938, Katharine returned to the East Coast and joined the staff of the Washington Post, the newspaper her father had acquired and was working tirelessly to revive. She started in a lowly but essential role, editing the letters to the editor section, for which she was paid just $25 a month, a pittance even then, scarcely enough for a decent meal out in the capital. Day after day, she pored over piles of incoming mail from readers across the D.C. area and beyond, ranging from fiery political opinions on Roosevelt's policies to eccentric local gripes about city services or neighborhood issues. Her job involved selecting the most compelling ones, editing them for clarity and brevity while preserving the writers' voices and ensuring they fit the paper's emerging standards of fairness and engagement. This behind-the-scenes work was unglamorous, often tedious, but it plunged her into the everyday mechanics of a newsroom, the deadlines, the debates over tone, the need to balance diverse viewpoints. It also gave her a front-row seat to public sentiment during a pivotal time, as debates raged over isolationism versus intervention in Europe's growing conflicts, and the U.S. economy clawed its way back. Through it all, she learned the subtle art of editorial decision-making, understanding how a simple letter could spark broader conversations or reflect the nation's mood. To grasp why this role at the Post carried such weight, it's essential to look back to 1933, when her father, Eugene Meyer, made a daring move amid the depths of the Great Depression. He purchased the Washington Post at a public bankruptcy auction held on the steps of its E Street building, paying $825,000, a sum that seemed reckless to many, given the paper's dire state. At the time, the Post was the weakest link among Washington's 5 daily newspapers, with a meager circulation of around 50,000 copies per issue and annual losses nearing $1 million. It had been owned by the extravagant socialite Edward Ned McLean, whose lavish spending had driven it into ruin, and critics predicted it would fold soon, overshadowed by stronger rivals like the Washington Star and the Evening Star. But Eugene, a successful financier with a vision for independent journalism, saw untapped potential. He invested heavily in its turnaround, upgrading printing presses for better quality and speed, recruiting talented reporters and editors to elevate content, shifting from partisan bias toward more objective, in-depth reporting, and modernizing operations to attract advertisers and readers. By the late 1930s, when Katharine joined, the paper was gaining traction. Circulation had begun to climb, losses were narrowing, and it was establishing itself as a serious voice in the capital, though it still had a long way to go before rivaling national giants. Katharine's personal life took a significant turn on June 5, 1940, when she married Philip Graham in a ceremony that united her family's media legacy with his promising legal career. The wedding, held in Mount Kisco, New York, at the family's Westchester estate, was an intimate affair reflecting their shared intellectual world rather than ostentatious display. Philip, born in Terry, South Dakota, and raised in Florida, was a standout intellect. He had graduated from the University of Florida before excelling at Harvard Law School, where he edited the Harvard Law Review and honed his analytical skills under mentors like Felix Frankfurter. By 1939, he was clerking for Supreme Court Justice Stanley Reed, and the following year for Frankfurter himself, a prestigious role that immersed him in landmark cases on civil liberties, wartime powers, and economic regulations, placing him at the heart of America's judicial elite. Frankfurter, a progressive jurist known for his incisive opinions and advocacy of judicial restraint became a key influence, guiding Philip through the intricacies of constitutional law. The couple settled into a modest two-story row house on 37th Street Northwest in Georgetown, a neighborhood buzzing with political energy as the U.S. edged toward World War II. Their union blended Katharine's privileged upbringing with Philip's ambitious drive, setting the stage for a partnership that would deeply entwine family, business, and public life against the global upheaval of the era. Over the next decade, Katharine and Philip built a family that brought joy and structure to their lives amid the post-war boom. Their first child, daughter Elizabeth Morris Graham, known as Lally and later Weymouth, was born in 1943 during the height of World War II, adding a sense of hope amid uncertainty. Son Donald Edward Graham arrived in 1945, just as the war ended and America celebrated victory. William Welsh Graham followed in 1948, though he would tragically pass away in 2017, and their youngest, Stephen Meyer Graham, was born in 1952. Katharine, drawing from her Lutheran baptism and Episcopal church attendance in childhood, embraced motherhood with full commitment, creating a warm home filled with the everyday rhythms of family life, the patter of small feet, lively dinner table talks that often veered into current events, and the challenges of balancing diapers, school schedules, and bedtime routines. She navigated the highs of watching her children grow, first steps turning into school plays, family vacations fostering bonds, while supporting Philip's career ascent. This domestic focus aligned with the era's norms, where women were expected to prioritize home over professional ambitions, and Katharine found deep fulfillment in nurturing her family in the heart of the nation's capital. A major shift in the family business occurred in 1946, when Eugene Meyer handed control of the Washington Post to his son-in-law, Philip Graham, naming him publisher in a move designed to inject fresh energy into the operation. This wasn't a hasty decision. Eugene, then in his 70s, sought a successor who could build on his foundations, and Philip's sharp mind and charisma made him the ideal choice. In her 1997 memoir, Personal History, Katharine reflected on this transition with striking honesty and lack of resentment. She wrote that it didn't trouble her at all that her father overlooked her for the role. In fact, she was relieved, as it never crossed her mind that he might consider her for such responsibility. Far from troubling me that my father thought of my husband and not me, it pleased me, she noted, adding, in fact, it would have been difficult for me to think of myself as running the paper. My insecurities were so great that they crippled me. At the time, cultural expectations confined women largely to homemaking, and Katharine embraced that path, devoting herself to raising their 4 children and providing steadfast support to Philip as he tackled the demands of leadership. Her behind-the-scenes role, hosting gatherings, offering quiet counsel, proved crucial, allowing Philip to focus on strategy while she maintained family stability. Eugene Meyer didn't fade into retirement after relinquishing daily control of the Post. In June 1946, he accepted the presidency of the newly formed World Bank, an institution born from the Bretton Woods Conference to aid post-war reconstruction and global economic stability through loans for infrastructure and development. As the first president, he set foundational policies, emphasizing international cooperation to prevent future depressions and rebuild war-ravaged nations like France and the Netherlands. However, his term lasted only 6 months. He resigned in December 1946, frustrated by bureaucratic hurdles and differing visions with the board, preferring to return to overseeing the Washington Post Company as chairman until his death in 1959. Under Philip's direction, the company flourished and diversified. He expanded into broadcasting, acquiring television stations such as WJXT in Jacksonville, Florida, in 1949, and WMBR-TV, later WPLG, in Miami in 1957. The latter renamed in his honor using his initials, Philip Leslie Graham. These moves capitalized on television's explosive growth, with families nationwide tuning in for news and entertainment, boosting revenue and reach. Then in 1961, Philip orchestrated a landmark deal, purchasing Newsweek magazine from the Vincent Astor Foundation for about $15 million. Founded in 1933, Newsweek was a respected national weekly rivaling time, offering in-depth analysis on politics, culture, and global affairs. This acquisition underscored Philip's ambition to transform the Washington Post Company from a regional player into a multimedia empire with national influence, drawing praise from peers who viewed him as a forward-thinking leader, reshaping the industry. The Grahams became central figures in Washington's elite social and political circles, where journalism, governance, and influence intertwined seamlessly. Their home and gatherings hosted a who's who of power brokers, fostering deep friendships that shaped eras. They were close with John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, sharing intellectual discussions at Georgetown dinners during the Camelot years, where JFK's charisma and policy ideas flowed freely. Robert F. Kennedy, the passionate Attorney General, was another confidant, bonding over civil rights and justice. Lyndon B. Johnson, the towering Texan vice president who ascended to the presidency in 1963, credited Philip with key advice on his Great Society programs. Their bond included hearty barbecues turned strategy sessions. Robert McNamara, the analytical defense secretary, steering through Cold War crises like Vietnam escalation, was part of the mix. Henry Kissinger, the shrewd foreign policy architect whose realpolitik defined U.S. diplomacy under Nixon and Ford, joined later, engaging in debates on global strategy. Even Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, before their 1980 White House rise, were friends from Hollywood ties transitioning to politics. These relationships weren't casual. They involved confidential talks over meals and parties, where wine loosened tongues and ideas influenced decisions, from domestic reforms to international alliances. In her memoir, Katharine offered reflective insights on these ties, particularly Philip's pivotal role in 1960 when he helped maneuver Lyndon B. Johnson onto the Democratic vice presidential ticket with Kennedy. As a trusted intermediary, Philip swayed delegates at the Los Angeles Convention through late-night calls and negotiations, a behind-the-scenes effort that secured Southern support for Kennedy's win. Such entanglements were commonplace then, but later seen as ethical minefields in journalism, as Katharine noted, marking the evolution toward stricter independence. She herself forged lasting connections, most notably with Warren Buffett, the legendary investor whose Berkshire Hathaway acquired a major stake in the Post starting in 1973, though their friendship began earlier in the 1960s. Buffett provided not just financial backing, but sage advice on business strategy, becoming a mentor who helped stabilize the company during challenges. Despite the glamour, Katharine often felt sidelined in this world. At opulent parties and events, she was seated in inconspicuous spots, overshadowed as conversations buzzed around influential men. Even close ones sometimes ignored her, viewing her as a mere appendage to the family's prestige, a faint shadow, as she put it. Her childhood shyness persisted, making her feel invisible amid the dazzle. Yet this position honed her observational skills, gathering knowledge that would later empower her. Beneath the surface, their marriage frayed due to Philip's struggles with alcoholism and manic depression, now known as bipolar disorder. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, his mood swings turned joyful highs into destructive lows, exacerbated by heavy drinking that led to belittling comments eroding Katharine's confidence. It was a hidden ordeal, outwardly successful. He inwardly battled demons in an era when mental health was stigmatized and poorly treated. The crisis peaked on Christmas Eve 1962, when Katharine learned of his affair with Robin Webb, an Australian freelance reporter stringing for Newsweek. Philip confessed openly, vowing to divorce Katharine, wed Robin, and split assets, including post holdings, consulting lawyers to begin proceedings. This betrayal deepened his instability. The affair triggered a public meltdown in January 1963 at the American Newspaper Publishers Association conference in Phoenix, Arizona. Amid the desert setting and industry talks, Philip suffered a severe breakdown, ranting incoherently on stage, stripping partially naked, and alarming attendees with erratic behavior. Colleagues intervened, sedating him for the flight back to Washington, where he was admitted to Chestnut Lodge in Rockville, Maryland, a leading psychiatric facility specializing in psychoanalytic treatment for mood disorders. Diagnosed formally with manic depression, he stayed briefly, but recovery proved elusive. On August 3, 1963, during a weekend pass at their Virginia farm, Glen Welby, a peaceful 250-acre retreat in horse country near Marshall, with rolling fields and stables, Philip took a 28-gauge shotgun and ended his life in the bathroom, while alone momentarily. The gunshot echoed through the estate, leaving Katharine, then 46, devastated and suddenly responsible for their children and the company. The news shocked Washington, prompting tributes from leaders like Kennedy, who called him a brave and dedicated crusader. Philip's death closed a chapter of ambition shadowed by anguish. The Washington Post leader, 1963 to 1991. In the wake of unimaginable personal loss, a woman who once trembled at the thought of saying Merry Christmas to her own staff stepped into the glare of corporate power, transforming a struggling newspaper into a journalistic juggernaut that shook the foundations of American politics. Katharine Graham, widowed at 46, didn't just inherit the Washington Post. She seized its helm with a quiet ferocity that defied every expectation placed on her as a woman in a man's world. From that fateful September onward, she became the chairman and de facto publisher, steering the company through turbulent waters with a blend of vulnerability, determination, and sheer grit. By 1969, she officially claimed the publisher title, holding it until 1979, and from 1973 to 1991, she served as chairman of the board. And in a groundbreaking moment in 1972, she shattered glass ceilings by becoming the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, taking the reins as chief executive of the Washington Post Company. This wasn't just a job for her. It was a rebirth, a chance to prove that strength comes in many forms, and hers would redefine what leadership looked like in media. As the only woman at the top of a major publishing company, Katharine had zero female role models to guide her. No one to look to for advice on navigating boardrooms filled with skeptical men who often dismissed her ideas or questioned her authority. Male colleagues and employees alike struggled to take her seriously at first, seeing her more as Philip's widow than a capable leader. In her memoir, Personal History, she laid it all bare. Her crippling lack of self-confidence, her doubts about her own knowledge and abilities. She was inherently shy, the kind of person who'd feel a knot of anxiety just chatting with reporters in the newsroom. Even simple things overwhelmed her, like the company's Christmas parties, where she'd spend hours rehearsing just to deliver a smooth Merry Christmas to her staff without stumbling. It was that deep-seated insecurity, rooted in her childhood and reinforced by years in the shadows, that made every step forward feel like climbing a mountain. Yet as the women's movement gained momentum in the 1960s and 1970s, with voices like Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan challenging the status quo, it converged perfectly with Katharine's growing control over the Post. This cultural shift didn't just inspire her, it transformed her attitude, pushing her to champion gender equality within her own company. She started advocating for more women in key roles, breaking down barriers that had kept them sidelined. No longer content to accept the old ways, she used her position to foster an environment where talent, not gender, determined opportunities. And through it all, she refused to quit. Instead, she turned her vulnerabilities into fuel, diving headfirst into learning from everyone around her, even those who reported to her. She soaked up the basics of journalism like a sponge, how to craft compelling stories, manage deadlines, verify facts. Then she expanded to the nuts and bolts of running a newspaper, balancing editorial integrity with business demands. From there, it was mastering the broader media landscape, negotiating deals, overseeing operations, understanding audience trends. And she didn't stop at media. She delved into the cutthroat world of business, learning about finances, mergers, and market strategies. What set her apart was how she infused her management style with qualities often seen as feminine: tolerance, a carefree openness that allowed for collaboration without ego clashes. These traits became the heart of her leadership, something her male counterparts simply couldn't replicate, creating a workplace where ideas flowed freely and people felt valued. Right from the start, Katharine knew her top priority was finding a stellar editor-in-chief to handle the content side, someone who could elevate the paper's journalism to new heights. She set her sights on Benjamin Bradley, a dynamo she'd encountered through Newsweek connections. The famed columnist Walter Lippmann had dubbed him a genius during his time there, and Katharine saw that spark immediately. Without hesitation, she appointed him as executive editor, though often referred to as editor-in-chief in practice, and handed him full authority to reshape the newsroom. Bradley was the epitome of modern journalism. He despised overhyping the press's role in society, hated fluff pieces that were trivial or bland. Instead, he championed a star reporter system, believing that attracting top talent with big names and bold personalities could rocket the paper to success overnight. He went out and poached elite journalists from powerhouses like the New York Times and Newsweek, luring them with promises of creative freedom, competitive pay, and perks that matched their skills. Under his watch, the Post's old creaky structure, bogged down by outdated practices and rigid hierarchies, gave way to a vibrant, innovative, and highly professional operation. The paper's political stance shifted too, moving away from cozy alignments with politicians to a more liberal, independent voice that questioned power without fear. This evolution birthed a distinctive style at the Post: dogged investigations that followed every lead to the bitter end, lightning-fast news delivery, rock-solid sourcing with reliable documents, and writing that cut like a knife, sharp, incisive, unforgettable. Katharine didn't just approve these changes. She threw her full weight behind them, cheering on Bradley's vision every step of the way. She ramped up the editorial budget from $4 million a year to a whopping $8 million, giving him the resources to hire more staff, invest in better tools, and pursue ambitious stories. Beyond that, she nurtured a crucial alliance with Warren Buffett, the investing wizard whose keen financial insights became her secret weapon. Starting in the early 1970s, she cultivated this relationship, seeking his advice on everything from stock strategies to company growth. Buffett didn't just consult, he bought in big, becoming a major shareholder and a key influencer on the board, helping stabilize finances during shaky times and guiding expansions that multiplied the company's value. At the core of Katharine's approach was a management philosophy that won hearts in the newsroom. What her employees loved most was her genuine encouragement and deep respect for reporters and editors alike. She had this mantra she often shared. In journalism, one shouldn't direct reporters and editors on exactly what to do. The responsibility is to convey all the news as truthfully, comprehensively, impartially, and with the highest quality possible. It was simple but profound. She trusted her team to do the work, giving them the space to excel without micromanaging. And when things went wrong, she bravely shouldered the blame, owning up to decisions as the boss. This built loyalty like nothing else. Staff felt empowered, knowing their leader had their backs. It wasn't about barking orders. It was about fostering a culture where truth-seeking was sacred, and everyone played a part in upholding it. Under Katharine's steady hand over those 3 decades, the Washington Post didn't just survive, it exploded into a media powerhouse. When she took over in 1963, the company's total revenue was a modest $8.4 million, encompassing just 2 newspapers, the Washington Post and Newsweek, plus a couple of television stations scraping by in a competitive market. But by the time she passed the torch to her son Donald in 1993, stepping down as chairman and handing over operational control, the Washington Post Company had morphed into a sprawling media conglomerate. It now included a fleet of newspapers reaching audiences far beyond D.C., a lineup of influential magazines tackling everything from politics to lifestyle, multiple television stations broadcasting to millions, various media production arms innovating in content delivery, and even education services like test prep and online learning platforms that tapped into new revenue streams. The transformation was staggering. Total revenue skyrocketed to $1.4 billion, landing the company at number 271 on the list of the world's 500 largest corporations. This wasn't luck, it was the result of smart risks, like going public in 1971 to raise capital, acquiring assets that diversified risks, and always prioritizing journalistic excellence amid growth. That trust paid off in spades during crises. Take the Pentagon Papers in 1971. When the New York Times got hit with a court injunction, the Post stepped up, publishing despite government threats. Katharine made the call, risking jail or fines, because she believed in the public's right to know about Vietnam War deceptions. It was terrifying. She later admitted sleepless nights, but it cemented the Post's reputation as fearless. Then came Watergate in 1972 to 74. Bradley's team doggedly uncovered the Nixon administration's scandals, with Katharine standing firm against White House pressure, advertiser boycotts, and even stock plunges. Her philosophy shown here. She didn't meddle in the reporting but ensured resources flowed, trusting the facts would prevail. Nixon's resignation vindicated them, earning Pulitzers and turning the Post into a national icon. On the business side, her partnership with Buffett was game-changing. They met through mutual friends, and by 1973, his Berkshire Hathaway snapped up 12% of the company's stock. Buffett wasn't a meddler. He offered straightforward advice on value investing, urging focus on long-term growth over short-term gains. This helped during expansions, like buying the Trenton Times in 1974 or launching new ventures in cable TV. Katharine also pushed for diversity, hiring more women and minorities, aligning with the feminist wave that empowered her own rise. By the 1980s, the Post was profitable, with circulation topping 700,000, and the company diversified into Kaplan Education, which became a cash cow. Her personal growth was just as remarkable. From that anxious woman practicing holiday greetings, she evolved into a confident speaker, addressing conferences and even testifying before Congress. The women's movement fueled this. Events like the 1970 Women's Strike for Equality resonated, prompting her to mentor female staff and advocate for equal pay. She used her feminine traits strategically. Her tolerance diffused conflicts, her openness encouraged innovation. Male execs might bulldoze, she built consensus, creating a loyal team that propelled success. By the late 1980s, as digital hints emerged, Katharine positioned the company for the future, investing in online prototypes while maintaining print dominance. Handing over to Donald in 1991, though staying on the board until 1993, she left a legacy of $1.4 billion in revenue, up from $8.4 million, with the company ranked 271 globally. It owned outlets like the Herald in Everett, Washington, magazines beyond Newsweek, TV stations in major markets like Detroit and Houston, media services producing content for syndication, and education arms revolutionizing learning. Turning points and challenges. In the turbulent 1970s, Katharine Graham faced a series of crises that pushed her leadership at the Washington Post to its absolute limits, from a violent labor uprising that nearly destroyed the paper's operations to high-stakes battles against the U.S. government that redefined the boundaries of press freedom. These weren't abstract challenges. They were raw, personal tests of her resolve, where she had to balance the survival of her company with her commitment to journalistic integrity, all while navigating threats that could have ended her career, or worse. Starting with the explosive strike of 1975, which turned her own workplace into a war zone, these events showcased her transformation from a self-doubting widow into a formidable force who stared down chaos and emerged victorious, forever changing the landscape of American media. The 1975 strike erupted in the dead of night on October 1st, right after midnight, as the labor contracts between the Washington Post and its various unions officially lapsed. For months, resentment had been simmering among the pressmen, the rugged blue-collar workers responsible for operating the enormous printing presses in the newspaper's basement on 15th Street in Washington, D.C. These were the guys who inked the plates, fed the massive rolls of newsprint, and ensured hundreds of thousands of copies rolled out each day. Katharine, determined to maintain the financial stability she'd fought so hard to achieve after years of red ink under her father's and husband's tenures, had implemented a series of cost control measures. She aimed to increase revenue through better ad sales and subscriptions, while trimming expenses by modernizing workflows, renegotiating supplier deals, and optimizing staff efficiency. It made sound business sense. The Post was finally profitable, with circulation climbing and the company expanding, but the execution by mid-level managers somehow alienated the printing department. The pressmen felt disrespected, burdened with outdated equipment that broke down frequently, and squeezed by demands for higher productivity without commensurate pay raises or improved conditions. They saw the changes as a direct assault on their livelihoods, and the union, Local 6 of the newspaper and Graphic Communications Union, decided enough was enough. What began as a standard walkout quickly spiraled into something far more destructive. By mid-October, the pressmen didn't just picket, they launched a full-scale sabotage operation. Around 200 of them, fueled by anger and perhaps alcohol from a nearby bar, stormed back into the printing plant after initially leaving, They wielded sledgehammers, pipes, and whatever tools they could grab, smashing control panels, slashing conveyor belts, and dousing machinery with flammable liquids before setting it ablaze. 9 of the web presses, those giant multi-million-dollar machines that printed the paper at high speed, were gutted by flames, with acrid smoke billowing through the building. Ink reservoirs were overturned, spilling gallons across the floor in sticky black pools. In the melee, they turned on their own foreman, a man named Joseph Pichocki, beating him severely with fists and weapons until he suffered concussion, broken ribs, and other injuries that landed him in the hospital for days. The violence didn't stop there as reporters, editors, and non-striking staff tried to enter the building or cross the lines. They were confronted, shoved, and, in some cases, physically assaulted. The newsroom, usually a hub of clacking typewriters and urgent phone calls, became a literal battlefield, with police called in to evacuate over 800 employees amid the chaos. For the first time since 1958, the Washington Post failed to publish a full edition, leaving the nation's capital without its key morning read, and creating a void in the flow of information during a politically charged era. The strike rapidly escalated, drawing in other departments in solidarity. The advertising staff, mailers, and even some delivery workers joined, ballooning the number of strikers to over 1,000. Picket lines formed outside the headquarters, blocking trucks and turning the streets into tense standoffs. Katharine, woken by a frantic call in the early hours, rushed to the scene in her nightclothes under a coat, surveying the devastation estimated at over $3 million in damages. She could have shut down or capitulated, but instead she mobilized. To bypass the crippled presses, she immediately contracted non-union repair crews from across the country, machinists and technicians flown in to rebuild what was destroyed, working around the clock under guard. For printing, she outsourced to independent facilities in suburban areas like Springfield, Virginia, and as far as Maryland and beyond, where sympathetic plants agreed to handle the load. To transport the printed sections back to D.C. for assembly and distribution, she chartered helicopters, yes, actual choppers hovering over the city, their rotors thumping as they airlifted bundles of newsprint from remote sites to the Post's loading docks. It was an ingenious, if expensive, workaround that allowed partial editions to hit the streets, sometimes as thin as 20 pages, but enough to retain advertisers and keep the brand alive. Readers got their news, albeit delayed and incomplete, proving the paper's resilience. This wasn't a short-lived dispute. It dragged on for 5 agonizing months, totaling 139 days, making it one of the longest and most brutal newspaper strikes in U.S. history. Negotiations at hotel conference rooms were marathon sessions filled with shouting, walkouts, and stalled proposals. Outside, the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. Strikers burned effigies of Katharine on the sidewalk, complete with signs reading, "Phil shot the wrong Graham," a vicious reference to her husband Philip's suicide in 1963 that had unexpectedly placed her in charge. They chanted slogans like "Scab post" at anyone crossing the lines, threw rocks at vehicles, vandalized cars in the parking lot, and created an environment of intimidation that scared off potential hires. One rally drew over 1,000 supporters, turning into a near riot with more threats and destruction. Yet Katharine refused to break. She worked tirelessly alongside her remaining staff, pulling all-nighters in makeshift offices, overseeing the helicopter logistics, and even helping coordinate ad placements by phone. She ate sandwiches at her desk, forgot about rest, and led without a single complaint or blame directed at her team. This hands-on approach, treating herself no differently from the entry-level clerks, earned her immense respect. Male executives and board members who had once whispered about her inexperience as a woman in power, now viewed her as a steadfast leader capable of weathering any storm. By February 1976, the strike collapsed as other unions, like the Newspaper Guild, began crossing lines to return to work, weakening the pressmen's position. The union was effectively decimated, with many strikers permanently replaced by new hires. Katharine later poured nearly 70 pages of her memoir into recounting this ordeal, more space than she gave to Watergate, describing it as the supreme challenge of her business life. It not only preserved the paper but elevated her status, demonstrating she could confront literal fire and fury while forging deeper loyalty among her employees. Shifting back a few years to 1971, Katharine and her executive editor Ben Bradley encountered their inaugural major confrontation with authority in the form of the Pentagon Papers. This trove was no ordinary leak. It comprised a staggering 7,000-page classified study ordered by Defense Secretary Robert McNamara in 1967. Chronicling 3 decades of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, the documents laid bare systemic deceptions by presidents from Truman to Johnson, how officials knowingly misled Congress and the public about the war's progress, escalated troop commitments despite internal doubts about victory, and concealed the true costs in lives and treasure. Daniel Ellsberg, a disillusioned Rand Corporation analyst who'd worked on the study, photocopied it and leaked it to expose what he saw as immoral policies, prolonging a hopeless conflict. The New York Times received the papers first from Ellsberg and began serializing excerpts on June 13, 1971, revealing shocking details like the Gulf of Tonkin incident's exaggerations that justified escalation. The Nixon White House, paranoid about leaks despite the papers focusing on prior administrations, reacted furiously, securing a temporary restraining order on June 15th, the first prior restraint on publication in American history, arguing national security risks. But Ellsberg had distributed multiple copies. One reached the Post via national editor Ben Bagdikian, who flew to Boston, met Ellsberg in a dingy motel, and smuggled back 4,400 pages in a cardboard box under his airplane seat. Suddenly, Katharine held dynamite, but the timing was disastrous. The Washington Post Company was mere days into its initial public offering on June 15th, with shares trading on Wall Street for the first time to raise capital for growth. Publishing could plummet the stock value, trigger shareholder lawsuits, or invite criminal charges under the Espionage Act of 1917, potentially landing her and editors in prison. Her legal team, including top counsel like Floyd Abrams and in-house lawyers, vehemently advised against it. This could destroy the company we've built. The board fretted about violating secrecy laws, endangering lives, or compromising ongoing diplomacy. The dilemma tore at Katharine: safeguard the business she'd inherited and nurtured, or fulfill the press's societal role by revealing truths that could alter public opinion on a war claiming thousands of lives weekly. She paced her Georgetown home, where editors had gathered clandestinely to sort the documents on her living room floor amid a dinner party upstairs. Bradley pushed hard for publication, arguing the papers exposed historical lies, not current operations. After agonizing consultations, including a pivotal phone call with her lawyers warning of grave and immediate harm, Katharine chose principle. She believed the disclosures would enlighten Americans on why the nation was bogged down in Vietnam, fostering accountability without truly harming security. Publishing these won't damage the country, she asserted. It'll serve it by upholding democracy. On June 18th, the Post ran its first article, headlined, Documents reveal U.S. effort in '54 to delay Viet election, igniting the firestorm. The Justice Department pounced, obtaining an injunction that same day to halt further stories. Undeterred, Katharine allied with the Times, fast-tracking appeals through federal courts. The case rocketed to the Supreme Court with oral arguments on June 26th, pitting government claims of irreparable harm against First Amendment defenses. On June 30th, in New York Times, Kobe v. United States, the court voted 6-3 to lift the restraints, with Justice Hugo Black writing that only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. It was a monumental win, establishing that prior restraint was presumptively unconstitutional except in extreme cases. Katharine's stock took a brief hit, dropping 5%, but rebounded swiftly as investors admired her courage. The decision empowered journalism nationwide, allowing more leaks and scrutiny of Vietnam. For Katharine, it was transformative. She reflected it was when she fully embraced her role as publisher, gaining confidence to tackle even greater foes. The pinnacle came with Watergate, the scandal that immortalized Katharine Graham and the Washington Post as beacons of investigative prowess. It began innocuously on June 17, 1972, with a botched break-in at the Watergate office complex. 5 intruders armed with bugging devices and cameras were caught inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters, attempting to wiretap phones and photograph documents. Most outlets dismissed it as a third-rate burglary, relegating it to brief items. But Post-Metro editor Harry Rosenfeld assigned young reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, sensing deeper intrigue when arrests revealed connections to Nixon's Committee to Re-elect the President, CREEP. Woodward and Bernstein's digging uncovered layers. The burglars included ex-CIA operative James McCord and Cuban exiles with Bay of Pigs ties. Tips from anonymous sources, including the legendary Deep Throat, FBI's Mark Felt, meeting Woodward in underground garages, linked it to White House dirty tricks. When they presented early findings to Bradley, he approved, and Katharine endorsed the pursuit, allocating time and funds despite skepticism. The Post published bombshells, slush funds financing sabotage, G. Gordon Liddy's orchestration from Creep, Attorney General John Mitchell's oversight. Bradley splashed them on page 1, while competitors like the Times lagged, viewing it as local crime. Nixon's team retaliated viciously to conceal the cover-up. Aides like Colson orchestrated challenges to Post TV licenses in Florida, threatening broadcasting revenue. The FCC dragged its feet on renewals, advertisers pulled out amid boycotts, and stock tumbled from $38 to $21 per share. Nixon on secret tapes vented, "The main thing is the Post is going to have damnable problems out of this one." IRS audits loomed for staff, wiretaps suspected. The crudest came from Mitchell himself in October 1972. When Bernstein phoned about a story implicating him in a secret fund used for Martha Mitchell's surveillance, he snarled, "Katie Graham's going to get her tit caught in a big fat ringer if that's published." It was a sexist, bullying attempt to intimidate. The Post didn't flinch. They ran the quote, edited mildly by Bradley to omit her tit for decorum. Katharine quipped it was particularly strange. Mitchell used Katie, a name foreign to her. The White Terror, a climate of fear with veiled violence, blacklisting, and harassment, intensified. But she shielded her team, declaring, "We've swum to the deepest part of the river. There's no turning back now." She encouraged persistence, protecting sources and ensuring safety. The coverage exploded. Over 400 articles peeled back hush payments to burglars, evidence destruction, Nixon's direct role. It galvanized media. CBS's Walter Cronkite devoted segments. The Times joined. Senate probes in 1973 exposed the tapes. The Saturday Night Massacre firing of Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox fueled outrage. Impeachment loomed, forcing Nixon's resignation on August 9, 1974, the only U.S. president to quit office. Watergate exposed America's gravest political corruption, spurring reforms like campaign finance laws and the Ethics in Government Act. It liberated journalism, allowing freer expression of views without reprisal, establishing investigative norms. The Post earned the 1973 Pulitzer for public service, vaulting it to elite status with circulation surging. Katharine's personal toll was high. Insomnia, lost allies in D.C. society, but she deemed it worthwhile for democracy. These interconnected trials, the strike's brutality testing her managerial mettle, Pentagon Papers' legal fight affirming ethical priorities, Watergate's showdown proving press power, sculpted Katharine's legacy. The strike, starting at 4 a.m. with burned panels and slashed belts, left Peachaki concussed. Katharine vowed publication on a mimeograph if needed, printing 600,000 copies remotely. Picket nastiness, vandalized cars spat upon reporters, culminated in a 1,000-person rally burning her effigy. But guild defections ended it, haunting yet necessary. Legacy and Laurels, Katharine Graham's memoir, Honors, Cultural Impact, and Final Days. From the shadows of personal tragedy to the spotlight of global acclaim, Katharine Graham didn't just run a newspaper. She became a symbol of unyielding courage, shattering barriers for women and reshaping how we think about truth, power, and perseverance. Her later years were a whirlwind of honors, reflections, and quiet handovers, culminating in a legacy that still echoes today. Let's walk through those crowning achievements. The heartfelt memoir that bared her soul, the nods from presidents and peers, her candid take on the press's dance with secrets, how Hollywood captured her fire, and the poignant end to a life that inspired millions. It all crystallized in 1997 when Katharine published her memoir, Personal History. This wasn't your typical self-congratulatory autobiography. It was a raw, unflinching look at her life, pulling no punches about the dark times. She delved deep into her husband Philip's struggles with mental illness and alcoholism, painting a picture so honest it stunned readers and critics alike. The book shone for its insights into how women's roles had evolved over her lifetime. From the constrained homemaker she started as to the powerhouse CEO she became, it captured the seismic shifts in society where women like her fought for space in boardrooms dominated by men. Nora Ephron, the celebrated writer from the New York Times, raved about it, calling it an incredible tale of how Katharine triumphed in a male-dominated industry, turning vulnerabilities into victories. The praise poured in, and in 1998, Personal History snagged the Pulitzer Prize for biography or autobiography. Yeah, she won that prestigious award for her own life story, a testament to its power and authenticity. But that Pulitzer was just one jewel in a crown of recognitions that piled up over the decades. Way back in 1966, she was the honoree at Truman Capote's legendary Black and White Ball, that glamorous New York bash where the elite mingled in masks and tuxedos. Think Andy Warhol, Mia Farrow, and the cream of society toasting her rising star. By 1973, she received the Elijah Parrish Lovejoy Award, named after the abolitionist editor martyred for his free speech, along with an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Colby College in Maine, honoring her commitment to journalism's principles. In 1974, she broke more ground as the first woman elected to the board of the Associated Press, that venerable wire service feeding news worldwide. She didn't stop there. She became the first female commissioner in the American Newspaper Publishers Association's history, serving a 9-year term and rising to its highest office, steering the industry through changing times. The accolades kept coming. In 1975, she earned the S. Roger Horchow Award for Greatest Public Service by a Private Citizen, an annual honor from the Jefferson Awards, recognizing unsung heroes who make a difference. Then in 1979, she popped up in an unexpected spot. The Super Sisters Trading Card Series, a set of collectibles celebrating influential women, with her name and photo right there, alongside figures like Gloria Steinem and Billie Jean King, aimed at inspiring young girls. That same year, author Deborah Davis released Catherine the Great, a biography delving into her life and impact, though it stirred some controversy with its claims about CIA ties that Catherine disputed. Fast forward to 1987, and she grabbed the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism, named after the trusted anchorman himself, for her unwavering standards in reporting. In 1988, she was elected a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, joining the ranks of thinkers like Albert Einstein and Margaret Mead. The 1990s brought even more shine. In 1997, she was awarded the Freedom Medal for her lifelong dedication to free speech and expression, a fitting nod to her battles against censorship. By 1999, the American Academy of Achievement handed her the Golden Plate Award, presented by none other than Coretta Scott King, widow of Martin Luther King Jr., celebrating her contributions to society. In 2000, the International Press Institute named her one of the 50 World Press Freedom Heroes of the past half-century, and the same group hailed her as one of the global press's top 50 elite figures. Posthumously in 2002, President George W. Bush awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, recognizing her as a trailblazer. That year also saw her induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame, immortalizing her among icons like Susan B. Anthony and Rosa Parks. Her influence extended to institutions she cherished. At the University of Chicago, her alma mater, a residence hall in the Max Palevsky Residential Commons, bears her name. And every February 3rd, they celebrate Graham Day, honoring her achievements with events, discussions, and tributes that keep her spirit alive for students. She had deep ties to the Rockefeller family, serving on the board of Rockefeller University and being a close friend of the Museum of Modern Art, where she received the David Rockefeller Award for her generosity and support of cultural and civic enlightenment initiatives. On top of that, she chaired the American Newspaper Publishers Association, guiding the industry's direction. Katharine wasn't afraid to tackle thorny issues head-on, like the delicate balance between the press and intelligence agencies. On November 16, 1988, she delivered a speech titled Secrecy in the Press to a packed auditorium at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, as part of their Office of Training and Education's guest speaker series. Addressing how media disclosures could impact national security, she didn't mince words. We live in a dirty and dangerous world. There are some things the general public does not need to know and shouldn't. I believe democracy flourishes when the government can take legitimate steps to keep its secrets, and when the press can decide whether to print what it knows. It was a nuanced view, acknowledging the need for discretion while defending the press's right to choose, sparking debates that resonate even today. Her story leaped into popular culture too. In 2017, Meryl Streep portrayed her in Steven Spielberg's film The Post, capturing her pivotal role in the Pentagon Papers saga with such depth that Streep earned an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, among other awards. The movie highlighted her courage in defying the government, bringing her drama to a new generation. Interestingly, she wasn't in the film adaptation of All the President's Men, the 1976 classic about Watergate, starring Robert Redford as Woodward and Dustin Hoffman as Bernstein. But Redford later revealed that early scripts included a scene for her where she confronted the reporters about their explosive story, starting with the line, "What are you doing to my newspaper?" It got cut, but it underscored her central role in that historic scoop. As the years wound down, Katharine thoughtfully passed the torch. Her son Donald took over as publisher in 1979, holding the post until 2000, building on her foundation with steady hands. By 1993, when she stepped down as chairman and handed full operational control to him, the Washington Post had evolved into a massive media conglomerate, boasting newspapers, magazines, TV stations, and educational services, with revenues hitting $1.4 billion and ranking 271 among the world's largest companies. A far cry from the struggling outfit she inherited. Tragedy struck in her final days. On July 14, 2001, while visiting Sun Valley, Idaho for a conference, the 84-year-old Katharine slipped and fell, striking her head hard on the pavement. She was rushed to St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center in Boise, Idaho, where doctors treated her for a severe head injury, but complications set in. 3 days later, on July 17, 2001, she passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. Her death marked the end of an era, but her funeral at the Washington National Cathedral was a grand affair, attended by presidents, journalists, and dignitaries who filled the pews to pay respects. She was laid to rest at the historic Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C., right across from her old Georgetown home, a quiet spot overlooking the city she loved.